Alright guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to go over a little thought exercise. Now, for those of you who might be new to the channel, go ahead and describe what a thought exercise is. So a thought exercise is a technique or a measure that I've been using since I was a kid to kind of broaden my own firearms horizons. So what I do is I pick a situation or a scenario, and then I identify weapon systems with perhaps some limiting factors and all that kind of stuff that would best suit this scenario. And I've been using this to kind of make myself think in ways that I normally wouldn't, or try to apply myself to scenarios that I don't commonly interact with, so that I can kind of see things through different people's eyes and get a more well-rounded understanding of what drives people to make some of the decisions that they make. So scenarios might include, say, arming a military post-World War II, or previous thought exercises that I've done, for example, a Kentucky elk hunt, which I'll throw in the description. If you find this video interesting, I'll throw in the description links to other thought exercise videos that I've done, because there's a very, very small contingent of my subscribers who actually like these videos. All right, now today, what we're going to be talking about is arming a guerrilla group. Now let me kind of like better understand, get a better understanding of what it is that we're talking about right now. So, in this scenario, one NATO-affiliated country has invaded another NATO-affiliated or equipped country. Let's say that the conflict is going on in Southeast Asia. And during the, I guess you could say, conduct of this conflict, it was identified that based off of the region, that there are a lot of different like tribal kind of dynamics going on there, and one tribe, which is generally picked on by everybody else, is interested in helping out your forces. And the U.S. actually is engaged in this type of activity in quite a few different conflicts, be it the Kurds or the Hazari, as well as the Montagnard tribesmen during Vietnam. So in this case, this is actually what like the Green Berets were built for, the idea of being able to work with local forces on unconventional warfare type aspects. And that's kind of what we're trying to channel right now. It's kind of a Vietnam Montagnard tribesman with the Green Berets type thing. So, take these guys, join with that tribe, make their villages defensible, supply them with weapon systems, not so much so that they can necessarily try to do stand-up fighting like a regular army, as much as they can conduct subversion type tactics or reconnaissance, disrupt enemy supply lines, destroy ammo depots, harass enemy patrols, that type of thing. Looking at an asymmetric warfare type aspect out of these personnel. And then the weapon systems that would help them in this process. So let's go ahead and talk about the region that we're fighting in. I don't necessarily want to assign a country or anything like that. There tends to be a lot of political things involved whenever you assign a country. But let's say that the region is a fairly mountainous region, and specifically where this tribe emanates from would be in the north of that particular country in Southeast Asia, in a rather mountainous region. And yeah. All right, so I think that pretty much lays out the overall thing that we're going for here, what our situation is. Now, what about limiting factors? So for limiting factors, I specifically want to avoid Eastern European communist bloc small arms, because it's a really easy answer. Everyone's automatically going to say, oh, well, go with an AKM and a PKM and RPG-7s and all that kind of stuff. And there you go. Bam, we're done. That's not what I want to go with. That's not at all what I'm after. I want to try to pick other weapon systems. So no com block small arms is pretty much the end state here. Now let's take a look at our terrain. Where is it that we're fighting? So as mentioned before, we have a relatively mountainous region. However, there are still some agricultural areas, fields, farms, valleys, orchards, pomegranate groves, all that type of stuff. So there's some difference across the country in the overall terrain. However, in the north of the country, we're definitely talking about a little bit of that agricultural aspect, and then a lot of mountains. So at the very least, if we arm this region, that's one large swath of the country that we don't have to worry about and can actually supply us reconnaissance type efforts throughout the rest of the country as they move forward, as well as being able to resist enemy attacks. It's a big section that you can go ahead and cut off and not have to worry about subverting. So with that, let's go ahead and start getting into some weapon systems here. So for the rifles that these guys are going to use, what I decided to go with was the HK416. with an 11-inch barrel. Now, this might come as a surprise to a lot of people that someone would go after this particular weapon and barrel length combo. A couple of things that we've seen in the last 20 years out of asymmetric warfare is that rifles are not nearly as important as they are in a military. And let me try to explain that further. The long-range aspect of rifles in the history of modern warfare has always chronically come under its actual first foreseen usage with the development of Spitzer-type bullets and smokeless powder. So, great, oh, well, this rifle can reach out to 500 yards, but the fighting's taking place at 100 yards, and our complicated sighting system is not necessarily helping us being able to engage at that distance when our zero is at 400 yards type of deal. That's what we're trying to avoid in this case. Rifles in asymmetric type irregular warfare are more often used as almost like PDWs. And going with an 11-inch barrel gives it something that's reasonably compact so that these forces can disappear into civilian civilian dynamics. They can disappear into the background while still concealing their weapon systems, and then also being able to employ them at closer range, because honestly, if you're talking about any guerrilla or militia group, they do not benefit from playing by somebody else's rules. In warfare in general, or any fight, you don't really succeed by playing by somebody else's rules. But specifically, these guys do not want to give the enemy the advantage to be able to move air assets against them, or perhaps mobilize or utilize indirect fires. If they can get in close to be able to nullify a lot of those capabilities, then they are at a greater advantage than the opponent is at that time, especially if they're dictating the overall tempo of the fight. So that's what drove me towards the 11-inch barrel in this case. Most of the time, if you look at a lot of asymmetric warfare that's going on right now, rifles themselves are used in fairly close quarters combat. So we don't really benefit from having longer barrels and the perceived greater distance that we get out of those projectiles at that point in this type of application as much as we do from short barrel setups overall. Now, to go along with that short barreled setup, I think that these guys should be outfitted, equipped, combine the two, you get out-equipped, with aimpoint PROs, or patrol rifle optics. I have one of these optics. It's absolutely fantastic. It's actually attached to a rifle that we'll be reviewing here in the not too distant future. Little teaser for you. They're a little bit cheaper than a Comp M4. However, they're still very sturdy, very capable, excellent optics, and a simple reticle system. It's just a single 2 MOA dot, which is plenty for what it is that these guys are trying to utilize these weapon systems at, for the distances that they would actually be fighting at based off of an 11-inch barrel and a 5.56 cartridge. And it's simple to be able to teach someone else to use, because with this region, we're talking about a third world country. So already the education is not going to be the highest. A lot of proficiency with technology is not necessarily going to be there. So if we can provide them simple optics platforms, it's going to be more beneficial on the training timeline to be able to make them proficient with those weapon systems. Now, in addition to that, the 416 is really fantastic for a couple of reasons. One, STANAG magazines and NATO standard cartridge. So they're going to be able to supply themselves with both magazines and ammunition from either captured enemy capabilities or provided friendly capabilities. So that's pretty excellent. You can definitely see where that would be handy. In addition to that, the 416 is a external gas piston system, which, though I would not necessarily say extremely more reliable than direct gas impingement, I actually discussed that in a previous video, which I guess throw the link in the description of that as well. But it does have greater longevity with less maintenance, and that is something that would be very interesting to these forces, especially if you're talking about guys who, maybe they don't put as high of a premium on cleaning their weapon systems every time they shoot them or something along those lines. The maintenance aspect of it might be more widespread, so they benefit more from having a proven, super reliable system. That, and also external gas pistons a little bit better with short barrels, but that's a discussion for another time. So that's what drove me towards the HK416. All right, now let's go ahead and start talking about some machine guns. So I want to actually identify two different weapon systems with two separate applications. So for kind of close range, high volume fire type stuff, I'm looking at the M249 SAW, known in the FN product line as the Mini-Me. Now, I'm selecting this specifically because the United States military is actually divesting itself of quite a few M249s, especially with the Marine adoption in the M27 IAR. Now, in addition to that, some people might be kind of scoffing at me right now, especially if they have any real experience of the M249, because it can be a tad unreliable. However, when we're talking about volume of fire and definitely getting the most out of an automatic rifle, because that's kind of what the SAW falls under, but the M27 IAR is kind of, in my opinion, a more direct copy of the automatic rifleman concept. The great thing about the SAW is that you can get 200 round pork chop containers, so that's pretty excellent. That's a lot of ammunition on hand, and if you supply that to quite a few guys in an element, you can really lay down some suppressive fire. And in this case, especially if we're looking at tactics that involve getting in very close for like ambushes and stuff like that, and to be able to provide that overwhelming volume of fire, the SAW is really going to help out of that, and it's something that's going to be relatively accessible. Parts are still available, weapon systems still being produced, and a major military is divesting itself of them, potentially. So you can definitely see where the SAW kind of starts to stand out at that point. Now, in addition to that, it also gives you a longer range capability than what you're going to necessarily get out of the rifles that have been selected thus far, and at a higher rate of fire. So you can pin down the enemy with those fires, and then have a whole bunch of guys with their short-barreled rifles maneuver in against them and be able to do their work that way. Just something to consider. Now, I would also like to have these guys outfitted with the FN Mag, which is FN's product line for the 240 and its many variants, Lima, Quebec, Bravo, Hotel, whatever it may be. And I select this specifically because, again, we're sticking with NATO standard cartridges, just like with the M249. We can get a hold of the parts, the weapon system's still in production. But also, we get that 7.62 capability for longer range type engagements. However, I see very niche requirements based off of kind of what I've already talked about for tactics for these guys. For the 240 in the actual field, I think the 240 really comes in advantage in a defensive type posture. One of the things I want to emphasize for these guys is high mobility. And the 240, while you can be mobile with it, is not as ready to employ in a mobile type setting. So it would be really great for an overwatch position, say perhaps suppressing fire to cover the withdrawal of ambushers, so that you can cover their retreat and make sure that everyone gets out, and you can do it with longer range fires than what you're going to be able to achieve with a 249. There's a definite advantage involved in that. But I really think that village defense or hamlet defense is where the 240 is going to really come in. Something that's capable of being able to propel that that effect to greater distance, as well as be able to maintain a higher rate of fire. So that's just something I was kind of evaluating with that overall, which when utilized in conjunction with these other weapon systems kind of gives you a tiered defense against approaching enemies, instead of having to wait for them to get much closer in order to be able to engage them with intermediate cartridge weapon systems. Now, going along with the longer range capability, we also need some sort of designated marksman's rifle so that somebody can flex their role into a pseudo sniper type situation, as well as be able to be used in conjunction with the 240 or whatever other weapon system, in order to be able to apply longer range suppressive and precision type fires. And for this, I actually wound up yet again going with another US weapon system, the M14. Now, with recent adoption of several new squad designated marksman's rifles, the M14 is most definitely finding its way finally out of the designated marksman slot that it was more or less shoehorned into during the War on Terror. So with that being the case, these weapon systems are now available. They're still good weapon systems. There's still plenty of life left in them. They've served their purpose exceedingly well, and a local force would not necessarily miss the advantages of the newer weapon systems that have replaced the M14, as much as they're getting a greater advantage out of the long range capability of the 7.62 cartridge that is also NATO standard. So now we're really putting them in a good position in order to be able to maintain themselves and supply them with the Leopold Mark IVs that the United States military was using on those weapon systems to begin with. All right, so that pretty much covers small arms for the most part. Now I want to go ahead and focus on some munition ordnance type weapon systems, what I would think would be very helpful in this case for this kind of modular fighting force. So first off, 60mm mortars. Exceedingly important because it gives a greater distance than what you would normally get out of a rifle grenade or something like that, while also being able to walk it in close. It's a highly mobile weapon system, which gives you the opportunity of being able to place high explosive type rounds on target to be able to really disrupt enemy capabilities. Be it, destroy machine gun positions or really mess up a patrol, attack outposts and stuff like that. The 60 being highly mobile will be difficult for enemy forces to be able to pin down and destroy. Definite advantage. Again, being 60 millimeter, we have NATO standardization, which means that they can get ammunition for pretty much everybody on the battlefield. And I mean, yeah, a 60 millimeter mortar is more or less a winged hand grenade, is what I most commonly refer to it as. But a winged hand grenade against the target that you normally wouldn't be able to hit with a standard hand grenade, or from a distance that you wouldn't be able to hit with a standard hand grenade, is better than silence. So there's a dynamic to go through there. Now, to go along with that, I think 81 millimeter mortar tubes would also be exceedingly important. This way, they're still relatively mobile. You can still utilize them outside of defensive type postures around the villages, while also being able to give a greater range capability from the villages in a defensive type posture. If a massive enemy force came in and attacked, you would have a greater range indirect fire capability beyond just what you would get out of a 60 millimeter mortar, so that you can't necessarily just be pinned down and obliterated by the enemy from a greater distance than what you can engage at. Now, of course, having an actual modernized military with different capabilities is also going to give you like air support and all that kind of stuff that I guess you could say indigenous forces wouldn't necessarily have, but they also need to be able to defend themselves if those capabilities are not necessarily immediately accessible. Now, to go along with that, let's address anti-armor. So in this type of scenario in mountains, we're not really worried about tanks. However, we should still be worried about armored vehicles of a lighter variety, wheeled type armored vehicles. So with that being the case, I decided to go with what is referred to as the GS777, which is a modernized RPG-7. Actually of US manufacture. So this is a lightweight RPG-7 with some polymer included in the construction, and it's capable of being used with any RPG ammunition. So the OG-7s, the PG-7s, the thermobaric variants, all of those types of munitions can be utilized with this weapon system. In addition to that, it also comes with an ACOG that is graduated for what we would normally refer to as BDC, but in this case I guess would be RDC, rocket drop compensation, which I think it's super cool that somebody took the time to build that into an ACOG and then add it to the weapon system. I have no idea how much these cost. I assume they're rather expensive, but I would definitely outfit a modern mobile force, because the lightweight aspect of that tube is what I'm really looking at in this case. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covered it. So I hope you guys found this interesting overall, and I would love to hear in the comments section things that you would change up, or maybe different things that you would think about and throw in there, as well as having a capability available. So with that being the case, that's pretty much what I got, guys. Have a good day.